It was a Thursday afternoon, the kind where the sun hesitates behind clouds like it can't decide whether to shine or retreat. Lorraine Carter stood on the porch in her worn house slippers, clutching a reusable grocery bag that carried a warm rotisserie chicken, a loaf of sourdough, and two dented cans of black-eyed peas. Her hip pressed lightly against the front door, her key in hand, the way she had done thousands of times over the past 2 decades. But today, something felt off. The key didn't turn. She frowned, adjusted the angle, tried again, slow at first, then faster, flipping it upside down like perhaps fatigue had made her careless. But the key wasn't wrong. The lock was. Her chest tightened as she knocked, first softly, then harder, still holding the grocery bag like it might anchor her to something familiar. The door creaked open a sliver. Julia Benson's heavily mascaraed eyes blinked through the gap. Lorraine hadn't seen her in a week. "Oh, hey, Mrs. Carter. You weren't supposed to be back yet." Lorraine blinked. "Why can't I get in the house?" Julia looked back over her shoulder and then slipped outside, pulling the door shut behind her with a nervous smile that didn't quite reach her lips. "I think Travis was going to talk to you about that." Lorraine's grip on the bag tightened. "Talk to me about what?" Julia inhaled slowly. "You don't live here anymore." The sentence hung in the air, thick and sour. Lorraine's world tilted. "Excuse me?" "It's just some paperwork stuff. Nothing personal. Travis said you agreed to transfer the deed. Remember all those forms from a few weeks ago at the kitchen table?" Lorraine's eyes narrowed. Yes, she remembered forms. Travis had said it was for taxes, something about protecting the house if something happened to her. He brushed off her questions like lint. She had trusted him. Her son, her only son. Julia, sensing the silence stretching too long, muttered something about giving Travis a call and slipped back inside. The door shut, locked again. Lorraine stood there for 5 minutes, then 10. No one opened the door again. She didn't knock. She turned and descended the stairs slowly, the chicken still tucked under her arm like a fragile infant. She walked without knowing where she was going. But she knew one thing. She wasn't going back in. Travis hadn't just taken her home. He had taken something deeper, something that couldn't be filed or signed away. But Lorraine was starting to remember exactly who she was. Long before the papers, before Julia, before that porch turned foreign. Lorraine had been more than a woman in a house. She had been a mother. Not to just anyone, but to a child nobody else had wanted. Back in 1996, Lorraine had been working nights as a nurse at St. Andrew's Hospital in Montgomery, Alabama. She was sturdy, calm, the kind of woman people turned to when things fell apart. She had long since made peace with the fact she would never carry a child of her own. Miscarriages, a failed IVF attempt, years of silent grief folded into her routine like sugar in coffee. Then, one night, a pale, bruised 2-year-old boy came in with a broken wrist. No jacket, t-shirt too big, mustard stains on the collar. His foster mother didn't even wait for intake, dropped him off and left. Lorraine didn't plan on adopting, but sometimes life doesn't tap politely. Sometimes it places a child in your arms and dares you to walk away. The boy didn't speak for 3 days. He just clung to her uniform, refused to eat unless she fed him, wouldn't sleep unless she hummed low and slow, like gospel through her ribs. 2 months later, she filed the first papers. 6 months later, his last name was Carter. Her friends said she was insane. A single black woman in her late 30s adopting a white toddler with night terrors. "You trying to save the whole system?" they asked. No, she said, just this one. Lorraine gave Travis a life wrapped in love and structure. A bedroom with a race car bed, afternoons of swim lessons, Sundays at the zoo. He had asthma, so she found the best pediatrician. Trouble reading? She hired a tutor. She taught him to braid using old action figures so one day he'd know how to care for a daughter. Every Christmas he wrote thank you notes. Every conference she showed up. She didn't just raise him. She rebuilt herself for him. But not all things stay sweet. By middle school, Travis grew restless. He began to ask why they didn't look alike, why people stared, why everyone assumed he was adopted. Because you are, she always said, but that doesn't mean you're not mine. He never fully believed it. In high school, the distance grew. In college, the visits stopped. Then Nathan, her husband, passed. And suddenly, Travis returned. At first, Lorraine thought it was healing. He mowed the lawn, brought over groceries, reminded her to take her blood pressure meds. Julia came too. Lorraine made cornbread while they sat on the porch, laughing at game shows. She allowed herself to hope. But Travis hadn't come home to rebuild. He had come to take inventory. And by the time she realized it, her name was off the deed. Her trust sold for scraps. Lorraine spent that night in her car, parked at 2 blocks from what used to be her home, near a row of duplexes where children shouted across yards and plastic chairs lined the porches. She didn't cry. Her hands never left the wheel, resting at 10 and 2 even with the engine off. The chicken grew cold. She stared out the windshield into nothing. Not the grief of death. Worse, the grief of betrayal. Nathan's death 3 years ago had gutted her. A stroke no one saw coming. But this theft of love disguised as help, it cut a new way. And yet, even there, Lorraine did what she always had. She took inventory. Not just of groceries or grief, but of power, because she had one secret not even Travis knew. After Nathan died, the hospital tried to call it natural, but Lorraine, a nurse for over 30 years, knew better. She filed, she fought, she documented. 2 years later, she received a settlement. $9.5 million. Not a soul knew, not even Travis. She had split it into 5 accounts under her maiden name, not out of paranoia, but peace, because money changes people. And she knew better than most how quietly betrayal can arrive. So sitting in the bank lobby the next morning, watching the balance blink unchanged, Lorraine didn't feel poor. She felt free, free in the way that still hurts. She booked a motel in Greenville, paid cash, 2 nights, no questions. The room smelled of bleach and old carpet, but it was hers. She sat on the bed, pulled out an old notebook from her purse filled with prayers, phone numbers, and a worn page that read, "Don't let money make you loud. Let it buy you time." She traced the sentence with her finger. Travis thought he kicked her out, but really, he'd just set her loose. She called a number she hadn't dialed in years. Marcus Bell, Nathan's old friend, a retired attorney with a memory like an elephant and a temper like vinegar. The phone rang 6 times. "This better be Jesus or something broken," he answered. Lorraine smiled softly. "Maybe both." "Lorraine Carter? I'll be damned. Where you been?" "I need to talk to you, Marcus." "Is it legal trouble or holy trouble?" "Maybe both." She told him everything, and he listened, quietly, like only real friends do. And when she finished, Marcus said, "Well then, let's remind that boy who raised him." Lorraine didn't smile, but she nodded, because the storm had already come. Now it was time to pick up the axe. The diner smelled like fried bacon and burnt coffee, the kind of place where the waitresses called you honey before they even saw your face, and the jukebox in the corner hadn't worked since the early 90s. Lorraine slid into the booth slowly, her knees aching from too many years on her feet. Marcus Bell sat across from her, a man who once used to spar in courtrooms, now wrapped in a brown wool coat and quiet wisdom. His beard had turned nearly white, and his hands trembled slightly when he lifted his coffee mug. But his eyes were still sharp, still the same ones that could strip a lie bare in 5 words or less. "You look tired," he said, studying her face. "I've slept in a Buick the past 2 nights," Lorraine replied, lips pressed tight. "That'll do it," Marcus muttered, then reached into his briefcase and pulled out a yellow legal pad. "Tell me everything, and I mean everything. No trimming, no softening. No, he meant well. I want it raw." Lorraine exhaled, feeling the weight press against her chest. So she gave it to him. The kitchen table, the pie in the oven, the way Travis handed her the pen without giving her time to breathe. How Julia stared at her like she was a tenant and not the woman who'd fed them both. Marcus scribbled notes as she spoke, interrupting only once to ask about the date she signed. She remembered it exactly because it was the last time she made sweet potato pie. When she finished, Marcus leaned back, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "He played you," he said flatly, "but he made one mistake." Lorraine didn't look up. "What's that?" "He forgot who raised him." She let the silence settle, then said the words she had been carrying like glass in her mouth. "I signed the deed, Marcus. But you didn't understand what you were signing. That matters, especially if he misrepresented the purpose. If we can prove coercion or misrepresentation, that transfer won't hold." Lorraine nodded slowly, absorbing the information like gauze soaking blood. "You think we can take him to court?" "Lorraine, I could take him to court in my sleep," Marcus said, his voice dry but sure. "But I'm guessing you're not trying to ruin him. You want your name back on that deed and your peace of mind." "Exactly. Then we don't go in swinging. We go in smart, quiet, like you always were." He took another sip of his bitter black coffee, then narrowed his eyes. "And what if it escalates?" Lorraine paused. She hadn't told anyone this. She looked down at her purse, then back at him. "I have money, Marcus." He raised an eyebrow. "A little retirement fund, or 9.5 million. His coffee almost came back out through his nose. "I'm sorry?" "Settlement from Nathan's death. Medical malpractice. I kept it quiet. Moved it across different accounts. Never touched it." He stared at her, stunned into silence for the first time since they'd sat down. "You've been sitting on $9 million and letting this boy walk all over you?" "I didn't want money to change the way I loved him," she said, barely above a whisper. "Well," Marcus replied, "it didn't. He changed all on his own." Lorraine blinked back the sting in her eyes. She hadn't cried, not when she slept in the car, not when the door shut in her face, but now, in the corner booth of a greasy spoon diner, she felt the grief bloom behind her ribs. Marcus reached across the table and rested his weathered hand on hers. "We'll fix it. You'll get your name back, and then we'll figure out what to do with the rest of your life." Lorraine gave a half nod. "No headlines, no drama. I just want my home." "Then we start with a petition. Investigate the transfer. We'll file in the county court. Shouldn't take long, especially with your notes." Lorraine reached into her purse and pulled out the old notebook. I wrote down everything, even when I didn't know why. Marcus smiled. Still a nurse at heart. Document everything. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the dates, the margins filled with Lorraine's tiny cursive. This is gold, he said. I've seen cases get tossed for less. Will it be ugly? It might, but you'll stay clean. Lorraine nodded. That's all I need. She paid the check, ignoring Marcus's half-hearted protest, and together they stepped out into the chill of the Alabama morning. Lorraine pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. The world felt slightly less cold. Back at the motel, Lorraine sat on the bed and stared at the ceiling. The heater clanked, the pipes whined, but her thoughts were louder. She thought about Travis as a child, how he used to panic when his inhaler was out of reach, how he clung to her hand during storms, how he once told her he wanted to build her a castle when he grew up. She thought about the night Nathan died, the way the hospital tried to smooth things over, how she held his hand while it went cold, how the settlement felt like salt on a scar. She thought about the way Julia smirked at her on the porch, how Travis had started calling her Lorraine instead of Mama. She remembered watering her begonias the day she overheard Julia say they were moving to Dallas after selling the house. That was the day she packed her bag, just in case. The next morning, Marcus called. He had already connected her with a young litigation lawyer named Dana. Smart, aggressive, well-spoken. She's got a spine like steel and a heart for cases like yours, Marcus said. Lorraine met with Dana in a quiet office downtown. The young woman listened carefully, asked the right questions, and didn't flinch when Lorraine told her about the money. We'll keep it out of discovery unless necessary, Dana assured her. Right now, we just focus on proving the transfer was done under misrepresentation. We'll request the original documents and serve notice. Lorraine signed a few forms and left the office with something close to hope in her chest. That night, she sat at the motel desk and flipped to a clean page in her notebook. She wrote down her new goal in steady, careful print. Take back my name. Take back my peace. Do it quietly. She placed her pen down and folded her hands. Outside, traffic hummed. The world kept spinning. But Lorraine Carter was finally still. She didn't feel small anymore. She felt like a woman who had survived betrayal and was now standing at the start of something holy. A reckoning not made of rage but of resolve. It wasn't about revenge. It was about restoration. The next day, she drove by the house. She didn't stop, didn't knock, just passed by slowly, like saying goodbye to something already gone. The yard was too perfect. The begonias were gone. But her spirit wasn't buried under that soil anymore. It had moved on, quietly, intentionally. Lorraine wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. Lorraine didn't call ahead. She knew if she did, Julia would answer, or worse, Travis would find some way to avoid her, to twist her words over the phone like he twisted her trust at the kitchen table. She didn't need permission, not anymore. That Thursday, just after the light rain broke into scattered sun, she parked on the street in front of what used to be her home. It looked too clean. The bushes had been trimmed into unnatural shapes. The lawn was flat like a page without a story. Her begonias were gone. She stood there for a moment before walking up the steps, her steps slow but firm, her purse heavy, not with fear but with clarity. She knocked once. It didn't take long. Travis opened the door wearing gym shorts and a branded hoodie that looked like it was trying too hard to prove something. He was holding a protein shake and blinked when he saw her, like her presence didn't fit the script he'd written. "Ma Lorraine, what are you doing here?" She noticed the stumble, the shift from Mama to name. She didn't flinch. "I don't need much of your time," she said calmly. "I just need to say something." He looked back over his shoulder, probably checking if Julia was home, then stepped outside and closed the door behind him, arms folded, his face unreadable but tense around the jawline. "Look, if this is about the house, let me finish," she said. He closed his mouth. "I raised you when no one else would," she said. "Not because I had to, and not because I expected anything in return. I did it because I saw a little boy who needed someone. I gave you everything I had, my time, my rest, my patience, my name." He shifted his weight from one foot to the other, but said nothing. "And you repaid me with signatures and silence, with locks changed and documents you told me not to read. You signed, Ma. It wasn't like I forced you." "Don't call me Ma if you don't mean it." Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like it was made of bone. Travis looked away, staring at a crack in the porch wood like it held a way out. She continued, "I'm not here to argue. I just came to tell you I know what you did, and you should know something too. I'm not broke, never was." His eyes snapped to hers. Disbelief came first, then confusion, and behind that, something like dread. "I've had money, Travis, real money, more than enough to buy this house 10 times over. But that's not the point. The point is, I never told you because love ain't a business, and trust shouldn't be measured in dollar signs." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "I've already spoken to a lawyer," she said. "What you did won't go unseen. It will go where it needs to go. I just wanted to look you in the eye one last time before it does." His hands dropped to his sides. "You're suing me?" "No," she said. "I'm reminding you what a home costs." And with that, she turned and walked back down the steps. No yelling, no tears, just the steady stride of a woman who finally remembered what she was worth. That night, Lorraine returned to the motel and sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of the confrontation still humming in her bones. She didn't cry. She didn't tremble. She just breathed, deep and slow. The kind of breath you take when the worst already happened and you survived anyway. Marcus called the next morning. "He'll fold," he said, without waiting for hello. "The documents are shaky at best. Dana already filed the fraud petition. We included your notes, your age at the time of signing, your lack of legal counsel, all of it. A judge won't blink." "What if he doesn't show?" "Then we win faster." Lorraine didn't smile, but she let out a sound that was almost a chuckle. "He'll run," she said. "It's what scared men do." "And you?" Marcus asked. "What do you do?" "I rebuild," she said, her voice like flint against stone. 2 weeks later, she received notice. A hearing date was set. Travis hadn't responded. Not once. No letter, no call. Julia had vanished too. Probably back to Dallas, or wherever the next opportunity dressed in skin-tight jeans and false promises was waiting. Lorraine sat on the motel bed and read the papers 3 times, then folded them and placed them beside her Bible. When the day of the hearing came, she dressed with care. A soft gray dress, a navy cardigan, modest earrings Nathan had once given her for their 12th anniversary. She walked into the courtroom with her head high and her voice ready, but she didn't need to speak. Travis never showed. Dana presented everything. The judge read the forms, reviewed the timeline, listened to the affidavit Lorraine had written with Marcus's help. The judge didn't even blink. "This transfer is null," she said. "The court recognizes the undue influence and misrepresentation. The deed will revert to Lorraine Carter, effective immediately." Lorraine didn't exhale until she stepped back out into the sunlight. Marcus was waiting by the curb, his hands in his pockets, a quiet smirk on his face. "Told you," he said. "Fastest court win of my year." "You want a medal?" she replied. "No, I want pancakes. Let's eat." But Lorraine didn't move back into the house. It wasn't hers anymore, not really. It had become a mausoleum of rehearsed dinners and quiet betrayals. Instead, she made a decision, something she had been dreaming of but never voiced. She drove south. Mississippi, small town, affordable homes. She bought 3. Not big, not flashy, safe. She called it Carter Haven, a place for women over 60 who had been discarded, displaced, or forgotten. The first resident was a woman named Ruth, 72, kicked out by her daughter when she couldn't babysit full-time anymore. The second was Janine. Hip surgery left her immobile, and her grandson sold the house while she was recovering. Lorraine cooked Sunday meals. They watched game shows. They shared stories, not out of pity, but power. No one asked Lorraine what brought her there. They didn't have to. They saw it in the way she moved, still, unapologetic. And when she looked out from the porch in the evenings, with her blanket over her lap and a cup of tea in her hands, the silence wasn't empty anymore. It was sacred. Then, one day, a letter came. No return address, just her name, in Travis's handwriting. She read it slowly. "I messed up. I see that now. I don't know why I did it the way I did. Maybe I thought I was owed something. Maybe I just never understood what you gave me. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say it. You didn't deserve what I did. I hope you're okay. Travis." She folded it gently, placed it in the back of her Bible, not to forget, but to remember without reliving. She didn't write him back. She didn't need to. Forgiveness, to her, wasn't about letting him off the hook. It was about taking herself off it. She leaned back in her chair, watching the sun drop low behind the trees. For the first time in years, she felt whole. And in that quiet, Lorraine Carter smiled. Not for what she'd won, but for what she had finally chosen to let go. 1 year had passed. The town of Pascagoula had softened into her like a pair of well-worn shoes, familiar in its silences and gentle in its pace. Lorraine Carter sat on the back porch of Carter Haven, her fleece blanket pulled up over her lap, a chipped mug of chamomile tea resting on the arm of her rocking chair. The sunset stretched wide and low across the sky, casting golden stripes through the trees and catching in the silver strands of her hair. The world had not stopped turning after the courtroom declared the house hers again. Travis had vanished from her life with the kind of silence that once would have broken her, but now simply floated past her like pollen in the air. She had not gone looking for him, had not spoken his name out loud in months. Some wounds did not need to bleed to remind you where they were. Carter Haven had filled a space in her soul she didn't know still echoed. The women who lived there called her Miss Lorraine or Mama Lo, depending on how old they were and how recently they'd been hurt. Ruth, the sharp-tongued former schoolteacher with 2 replaced knees and a laugh like gravel, liked to sit beside Lorraine in the mornings and critique the newspaper like it owed her money. Janine, once a gospel choir director in New Orleans, hummed as she made cornbread that could make you weep. There were 3 others now. Evelyn, who had survived a silent marriage and a loud divorce. Marlene, who read too much and spoke too little. And Ruby, the youngest of them all at 62, who still wore lipstick every morning and believed healing should always come with a little glamour. They shared chores, cooked together, planted flowers in the garden, and every Sunday evening they gathered in the common room to talk, not about what they'd lost, but about how they'd lived. Lorraine didn't need to lead. She just listened. That was enough. Sometimes at night she would sit in her room and open her notebook, the same one that once held legal notes and prayers and emergency phone numbers. Now it held grocery lists, song lyrics she remembered in fragments, small pieces of overheard conversations that struck her as profound, and always, near the back, the folded letter from Travis. She hadn't reread it in months, but she hadn't thrown it away either. Some things didn't need to be revisited to be remembered. Forgiveness, she had come to believe, wasn't a door you opened. It was a place you sat beside. She didn't forgive him for him. She forgave him for herself, for her sleep, for her knees, for her ability to laugh without choking on what-ifs. Forgiveness wasn't forgetting. It was surviving. It was reclaiming the breath someone tried to steal from your chest. And in that way, Lorraine was not just surviving. She was blooming. Marcus Bell still came by once a month, mostly to check in, but always pretending it was about paperwork. He'd bring a box of store-bought donuts and complain about the coffee while secretly enjoying both. The last time he visited, he stood in the garden watching the women prune the rose bushes and said, "You know, you could have taken that money and bought a villa in the Bahamas." Lorraine had smiled, her hands in the dirt. "And be alone with my thoughts? No, thank you. Still," he'd said, "what you built here, it's something else." She had looked up then, eyes shaded by her wide-brimmed hat, and said, "I didn't build it alone. They built me right back." On a Tuesday morning in early fall, a new woman arrived. Her name was Elise, 67. Her son had emptied her bank account while she was in the hospital and left her with no place to go. She walked with a cane and spoke very little. But when Lorraine showed her the small lavender room at the end of the hallway and said, "It's yours now," Elise had closed her eyes like someone exhaling after a long, silent prayer. That evening, Lorraine cooked stew, the kind that needed no recipe because it lived in her bones. The kitchen filled with the sound of Ruth's laughter and Janine's gospel humming. The television buzzed faintly in the background, and someone had lit a candle that smelled like cinnamon and old stories. They sat around the table as the sun dipped low, and for a moment, no one needed anything more than what they had right there. The next morning, a local reporter came by, a young woman named Kayla who had heard about Carter Haven from her aunt and wanted to write a story. Lorraine had said no at first. She didn't want cameras or headlines. But then Janine said, "Some women need to know this place exists." So Lorraine agreed. They sat on the porch, the reporter scribbling notes as Lorraine spoke plainly, carefully, the way nurses do when explaining difficult medicine. "What made you start all this?" Kayla asked. Lorraine didn't answer right away. She looked out across the lawn where Ruby was watering the ferns and Marlene sat reading under the shade. "Someone took my house once," she finally said. "But he didn't take my home. Because home is something you carry. It's what you give. And sometimes what you give finds its way back to you in the most unexpected form." Kayla blinked, her pen still. "And what would you tell someone going through something similar?" Lorraine looked her dead in the eye. "You don't fold when you're cornered. You breathe. You plant your feet. And you protect your peace. Quietly, if you can. Fiercely, if you must." That line ended up as the quote at the top of the article. The paper ran it under the headline, "The Woman Who Rebuilt Home from Scratch." Lorraine didn't care for the title. She didn't rebuild it from scratch. She rebuilt it from scars. And scars don't vanish. They just stop hurting when you stop hiding them. A month later, a check arrived in the mail. A donation from a woman in Atlanta whose mother had read the article and left her house to Carter Haven in her will. Lorraine cried that day, not because of the money, but because someone out there believed in the work enough to make it part of their legacy. And so, she opened a second house, then a third. By the end of the year, Carter Haven had grown into a small network. Nothing fancy, no logos, no website, just word of mouth and women who didn't want to feel disposable. They planted vegetables, they painted each other's nails, they kept journals and baked pies and took walks in the late afternoon like they owned every breeze. One night, as Lorraine stood by the kitchen sink rinsing a handful of collards, she looked up at the window. Her reflection stared back. The same eyes, the same hands, but something softer in her shoulders now, not defeated, not guarded, just still, like she had finally learned to live without bracing for the next betrayal. That night, she sat on the porch again, blanket tucked over her legs, and listened to the crickets rise up in song. No tears, no echoes, just breath. The kind that fills not just lungs, but memory, meaning. A home wasn't brick. It wasn't paperwork. It was this. The space you held for others, and the space you held for yourself. Somewhere out there, Travis was living with the weight of his choices. Lorraine didn't wish him harm, but she didn't wish him home either. She simply wished him awareness. The kind that burns clean, the kind that teaches. Because some lessons don't arrive in anger, they arrive in absence. And some homes don't burn down. They rise somewhere else, stronger, wiser, rooted. Lorraine sipped her tea and whispered to the quiet, "You didn't take me down. You set me free."